There are a few things you need to understand about managing assemblies for this exam and for working with C# applications in general. And so let's talk about managing assemblies. First of all, what is an assembly? Pretty straightforward. An assembly is the program file that is actually created when you compile your project. Now, normally this is going to be an exe or a DLL file, and that one file contains all the files and resources required to run the application. You've probably heard before there's a manifest and there's all these other resource files and stuff in there. The main thing, you have intermediate language or IL, metadata, and resources. And if you remember, the metadata, the intermediate language especially, is what the common language runtime actually uses to execute this application or this code on the computer. In the .NET world, we write it in C#, it gets compiled to IL, then it gets handed on down into machine code when it's finally run. Now, we're going to end up with usually an exe file or a .dll file, and keep in mind that the assembly is the unit of deployment in a .NET application. When it's all said and done, the assembly is what we're going to move on to the client's machine to give them the ability to run the application. Now, an application can be handled two ways with assemblies. It can be compiled into one single assembly, or the functionality can be separated into multiple assemblies, and then we can have different assemblies out there that are shared amongst various applications quite easily. What we'll end up doing there is creating and compiling multiple projects with each one focused on special functionalities. Now, there's a lot of possibilities here with how you treat your assemblies, multi-file assemblies, and so forth. Those are outside the scope of this course and the exam, so just pay attention to the single file assembly, but just know you can do multiple single file assemblies and break the functionality into each one. Now, .NET assemblies are versioned by a 4-part version number, and that relates to major, .minor, .build, .revision. Here's an example. Here's a version number, 4.0.203.78.6874. Now, you will have to have some sort of standard in place for when you increment these, under what conditions, and so forth, because the assembly version number is used by the Common Language Runtime, CLR, when an assembly has been signed with a strong name that allows multiple versions of an assembly to then coexist side by side. And then our applications can use whichever assembly they're basically versioned for. So if we have an update to an application, but we still have some departments running the old one, they haven't been updated yet, their particular applications can point to one assembly, while the new updated applications can point to an updated assembly with a different version number. Now, this prevents the old DLL hell scenario where we had all these shared DLLs amongst applications. So one DLL is shared amongst 6 different applications. Somebody uninstalls an application, it takes that DLL off, or they update an application and it updates that DLL and it breaks everything and all the others. That's no longer a problem if we manage our assemblies correctly. Now, there are 2 ways that you can see the assembly version. I'll show you these in just a moment, but for now, look at them in text here. We can open the project properties and click on the assembly information button, and then in Solution Explorer, we can look in the properties folder and open assemblyinfo.cs. Now, .NET assemblies can be signed, and that's called using strong names to ensure the integrity of the code. Once we create an assembly and put it out there and allow other applications to use those, to utilize that code within them, that's great for code reuse and sharing and organization and stuff. However, we want to make sure that that assembly has not been tampered with since we set it there. And so, by signing these, by using strong names, we ensure the integrity of that code. The assembly is digitally signed using a private key, and then it can be verified using a public key. And so therefore we can know there have been no changes to it. So let's look at how to sign an assembly in Visual Studio. All right. And so what I'm going to do here is jump out into Visual Studio, and actually let's do all this in part 2 so that we can take our time and step through it. So join me in part 2 of managing assemblies. We'll go out there and sign an assembly in Visual Studio, look at those version numbers and all that sort of thing. So join me in part 2.